So the question for this week's Ring of Power is, in this time of global transformation, what do I subjectively feel is relevant for peace workers, regardless of issue area, socialization, geography? And in some ways it's a very difficult question because so much of knowledge and wisdom is contextual. And so maybe the place to start from is the more universal place. And I'd say 4 things come to mind when I hear this question. The first is, maybe I say 4 practices come to mind when I hear this question. So the first practice is being a really good student of our culture. And I don't mean culture in I mean culture in the sense that what culture is a set of shared agreements, shared delusions, and in some ways it's the oxygen in which we breathe. And so it's very difficult to step outside of that understanding of what's actually happening around us. And even so-called progressive cultures and cultures that we are within communities, for example, being really not critical for the sake of critical, but understanding their texture, understanding their impoverishments, where are they limited, and especially when it comes to the neoliberal system and the broader culture at large, is to think of it almost as like spiritual political praxis, right? The inner world is being reflected in the outer world. And so it requires both radical self-responsibility and structural critique, a constellational worldview of what's happening in the world. The second, I'd say, is disidentification from the dominant system. So if the first practice is understanding the oxygen in which we breathe, the second is to disidentify from that culture. And this requires really deep programming work. I see this as lifelong spiritual, political deprogramming and unlearning. Even though some of the most progressive activists I know still think the Nobel Prize matters, right? And still want external validation of some kind. And as soon as we allow that to enter our field, we are essentially commodifying ourselves and breaking the contract we have with life. Our loyalty is not to any institution, any system, any culture. Our loyalty is to life itself. And so anything that blurs those distinctions for us, I think part of, especially in this critical moment, part of the practice is to disidentify, as difficult as that may be. The third practice is transcending the subject-object duality. And again, there's infinite ways into this particular practice. It could be psychedelics, it could be tantra, it could be meditation, it could be yoga. But the practice stems on the idea of there is no subject and there is no object. There is no me and there is no other person outside of me. These two social facts are actually playing off of each other as fractal mirrors and manifestations and reflections of each other. And to hold that as a spiritual political practice it's also very difficult work. It's lifelong work. And whenever we think the problem is outside of us as peace workers, we're often perpetuating the victim-perpetrator cycle. And so that entitlement that we see in 1%ers exists within all of us. It just manifests in different ways. And that victimhood we see and want to defend is also manifest within ourselves. And this practice is, it's a practice of lifetimes, and I say that with plural. And I think also related to this is the idea of like new cultures, right? That somehow we're going to, the thing that is the problem is that we have to create the new culture. And we get into another form of arrogance, even intellectually, when we try to transpose the subject-object with our own value system and our own beliefs, as opposed to being in service to multiple adjacent possibilities that are simultaneously true in certain contexts, in certain ways. And the final practice is the practice of animism. which is to be in dialogue with the living planet and the living cosmos. And it's also not like a switch that you can just go from mechanistic, rationalistic worldview to all of a sudden an animistic worldview. This is really a practice in the true sense of the term. You know, it's naming things and telling things your name and asking for permission and being in dialogue and being vulnerable to the external world, knowing that it is interfacing and interacting with us at every given moment. And it does require humility, and it does require a radical shift in our ontology in many ways. And yeah, those are the 4 practices that come to mind when I hear this question. So thank you for all the work that you're all doing in deep integration of this and your own inquiry and your own exploration. Shukran.